Reputable Rahab by Brenda M. Lane. Was Rahab reputable? What is your life worth? Ask that question, I'm sure that Rahab would have put her head down. She knew the why of how her life had turned out, but how she could ever turn it around was a completely different subject. The fact was, she couldn't. Until that day. She could not have dreamed, nor even dared to dream, that something so monumental was about to transpire in her life. But there was a larger plan in motion, and she was presently going to be swept into the experience of a lifetime. This is her story, the true story of Rahab. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5, verse 8. Rahab's story based on Joshua chapters 2 through 6. Little Rahab. That's how my sister described Rahab's plot in life. She was a prostitute. It's how she earned her living. She used the money to take care of her mama and papa and her siblings. It said a lot about her character, she mused. I raised my eyebrows. She continued, she put herself in a horrible situation in order to bring sustenance to her family. Can you imagine how broken she must have been? My sister mourned over her. All the men that had abused her, the dirtiness of her situation, such a hopeless circumstance. She went on, but oh, her future, her wondrous future. God knew Rahab's heart. He knew the plans that he had for her. In that region, the Israelites were known by their reputation, God-fearing men who were successfully taking over the countryside. They feared God, but men feared them. They could not be stopped. Rahab had heard of them too. Her little abode sat right on the wall of Jericho, walls that would soon be coming down by the shout of these God-fearing men. And God knew that too. But he had an eye out for Rahab, and he had a plan. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Joshua 2, verse 1. God was going to use this visitation for her good. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. Rahab was brave. Oh, she was brave, and she had wisdom. Her circumstances did not define who she was deep inside. God could read that heart. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. My sister is a seamstress. She makes the most beautifully designed quilts. Her designs are extraordinary. She has sewn all of her life and has developed a keen eye for materials and design. Flax, she said. It is what linen is woven from. The priests used it for their clothing. It was considered to be a symbol of purity. Once the fibers are processed, it is a beautiful fabric. It flows effortlessly. And though this plant begins its life with beautiful little flowers, this tenacious plant, when drying, is dirty, prickly, and mixed with weeds. You harvest it by pulling it up by the roots, then tying it into sheaves, and then stacking the stalks to dry. Scratchy, itchy, dirty stalks. After it's dry, then you ret it. The fiber that runs the length of the stem needs to be removed before it can be worked into linen. The retting of flax is actually a controlled rot. This step breaks down the hard stem of the flax, making it easy to break away the unwanted parts of the fibers. This can be done by submerging the flax in water or by laying it on the ground and allowing the dew to moisten it. It stinks during the process. Rahab knew flax. She knew the whole process of taking flax and turning it into linen. It was drying on the top of her roof. Maybe the flax gave her hope. But for now, it was giving the Israelite men hope. They were nestled under it, and their lives were at the mercy of Rahab. My sister pointed out that Rahab must have suffered much cruelty from many men. She didn't want anyone else to suffer as she had. She bravely covered for these men of God, and her plan worked. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that God has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Rahab knew of this God, and she described him well. God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. That knowledge had to give Rahab hope. Could he be her God? She continued to plead with the men. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. And she received the promise she longed for. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. They didn't know Rahab. And even though she had just saved their lives, they had their doubts. But God did not doubt Rahab. He knew her completely. His plan would come to pass. Rahab confidently took action. She took a strong scarlet cord, a rope sturdy enough to bear their weight, fastened it in safety to the wall, and then let them down, giving them sound direction to follow for their safety. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, Go to the mountains. The pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you have brought your father and mother and your brothers and all your family into the house, well, if any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from this oath you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Rahab wasted no time in securing safety for herself and her family. The scarlet cord must have drawn attention, hanging as it was from her window, but the townspeople most certainly must have thought that it had to do with her sinful employment, never guessing that it was her symbol of deliverance. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." God confirmed Rahab's words, and it instilled hope in Joshua, who was just about to follow the Lord's unusual direction. After a miraculous parting of the waters of Jordan, which signified to the enemy that God was with them, they were to go to Jericho. They would march around the city without lifting a hand of violence. God was going to do the saving that day. When Joshua neared the gates of Jericho, he could see that they were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the army, "Advance. March around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day that I tell you to shout. Then shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once, and then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to camp. And they did this for 6 days. Rahab must have been watching from her window. She must have felt a thrill of excitement coursing through her. Would they keep their promise? Her family was all gathered together with her, and they watched the army marching around Jericho. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that day they circled the city for 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent." Honor. God was honoring Rahab. In the middle of a great battle, Joshua, this great leader of the Israelite tribe, remembered her name, remembered her kind deed, and was singling her out to be saved amidst all the inhabitants of Jericho. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys, except Rahab and her family. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in the place outside the camp of Israel. Oh, the joy! She was saved, and so was her beloved family. Once extracted from the war zone, the Israelites placed her outside the camp of Israel. She was an outsider, but, she was saved. I can imagine that she was so grateful that she had been saved that she didn't care where they had placed her. But God was not finished. He had significant plans for her. It turned out that Salmon, one of the 2 spies she sheltered, fell in love with her and married her. Salmon was a prince of the house of Judah, and thus Rahab married into one of the leading families of Israel. In turn, she became the mother of Boaz, who married Ruth, from whose son Obed, Jesse, the father of David, came, through whose line Jesus was born. She would be remembered throughout history. She's mentioned in the Bible, Hebrews 11, as a woman of great faith. By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. Hebrews 11:31. Little Rahab. Doomed, broken, scorned little Rahab had a destiny that exalted her above the station of life that surrounded her. God's ability to transform our lives is without borders, without limitations, and without condemnation.
Thanks for listening. Brenda looks forward to connecting with you in the comments. Let her know your thoughts about this story or video in the comments section.